My name is Anastasia, and I just turned 32 last month. Growing up, I watched my cousin Jackson get everything handed to him on a silver platter, while I had to work for every single thing I ever owned. New cars, private schools, expensive vacations, designer clothes, you name it. Our very different upbringings created a complicated relationship, to say the least. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened at Thanksgiving dinner last year, when he accidentally discovered I was worth $10 million. Let me tell you, the meltdown that followed was one for the history books. Before I get into this wild story, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to deal with entitled family members. I grew up in what most would consider a solidly middle-class family in a suburb of Boston. My dad worked as an electrical engineer, and my mom taught second grade at the local elementary school. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house with one bathroom that always felt too small whenever we had guests. My parents weren't poor by any means, but they were extremely careful with money. Every purchase was planned, every expense was tracked in my mom's meticulous budget notebook, and impulse buys were practically forbidden in our household. "Money doesn't grow on trees, Anastasia," my dad would say whenever I asked for something that wasn't absolutely necessary. "If you want something special, you need to work for it." That philosophy shaped my entire childhood. When I wanted a new bike at age 8, I spent months doing extra chores around the neighborhood, collecting bottles for recycling money, and saving every birthday dollar that came my way. The pride I felt when I finally earned enough for that blue Schwinn with the white basket was indescribable. My parents matched my savings as a reward for my hard work, but I had to earn my half first. Then there was my Uncle Josh and Aunt Melanie. They lived in a sprawling 6-bedroom house in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the area, complete with a pool, tennis court, and 3-car garage filled with vehicles that cost more than my parents' annual salaries combined. Uncle Josh had inherited a successful manufacturing business from my grandfather and expanded it considerably, making them the wealthy branch of our family tree. Their son, Jackson, was 2 years older than me, and from as early as I can remember, he was the golden child who never had to wait for anything he wanted. While I saved for months to buy a $20 toy, Jackson would casually mention something he liked and find it waiting for him the next day. The contrast between our lives became especially clear during family gatherings. I still vividly remember Jackson's 10th birthday party. It was held at an indoor water park they had rented out entirely for the occasion. When it came time to open presents, he tore through package after package of expensive toys with barely a pause to appreciate any of them. The grand finale was a brand new gaming console that had just been released that week, along with 15 different games. Jackson barely managed a half-hearted thank you before moving on to the next shiny distraction. 3 months earlier, for my 8th birthday, I had received a new backpack for school, some books, and a simple digital watch that I treasured because I had mentioned wanting one 6 months earlier, and my parents had remembered. The difference in our celebrations wasn't just about money. It was about expectations and gratitude. "Your cousins have different values than we do," my mother explained when I asked why Jackson had so much more than me. "We believe in teaching you the value of things, not just giving them to you." As children, Jackson and I actually got along fairly well when we were very young. We would play together during family gatherings, building forts in the basement or swimming in his pool during summer barbecues. But as we grew older, the wealth gap between our families began to create a divide. By the time we were preteens, Jackson had developed an air of superiority that made our interactions increasingly uncomfortable. He started making comments about my clothes, asking why I wore the same jacket 2 Christmases in a row, or why my sneakers had scuff marks. He would proudly show off his latest gadgets, knowing I couldn't afford similar ones. "Dad says people who work for other people will never be truly successful," he told me once during a 4th of July gathering when I was 11. "He says employees are just helping someone else get rich." I didn't know how to respond to that at the time. My parents both worked for others, and they seemed perfectly happy with their lives. But Jackson's words planted a small seed of doubt that would occasionally resurface whenever I noticed the material differences in our lives. There were moments when the inequality hurt more than others. When my old laptop died while I was working on a school project in 8th grade, I asked my parents if we could get a new one. They explained we'd have to wait until the next month when Dad got his bonus. That same weekend, I overheard Aunt Melanie casually mention that they had just bought Jackson his second computer that year because he wanted one with better graphics for gaming. The mixture of emotions I felt was complicated. There was envy, certainly, watching Jackson float through life without financial constraints. There was confusion about why life seemed to give some people everything so easily, while others had to struggle. But mostly there was a quiet determination growing inside me, a desire to prove that hard work and perseverance could be just as valuable as having everything handed to you. Little did I know how dramatically our paths would diverge as we entered our teenage years, or how those early lessons in value would shape the person I would become. High school marked the point where the differences between Jackson's life and mine became impossible to ignore. While I attended the local public high school, Jackson was enrolled in Westfield Academy, an exclusive private school with annual tuition higher than what some colleges charged. His uniform cost more than my entire wardrobe, and he never missed an opportunity to mention the famous alumni who had graduated from his prestigious institution. During my sophomore year, I got my first regular job at a local coffee shop, working weekends and some afternoons after school. The pay wasn't great, but I was saving every penny for college. My parents had been upfront with me since I was young that they would help as much as possible with my education, but scholarships and part-time jobs would need to fill the gaps. Meanwhile, Jackson turned 16 and received a brand new BMW convertible as a birthday present. I still remember the day he drove it to our house, deliberately revving the engine in our driveway to make sure everyone noticed his arrival. "Sweet ride, right?" he said, tossing the keys from hand to hand as we stood outside. "Dad let me pick the color and everything. 0 miles when we picked it up yesterday." I nodded politely while internally calculating that his car cost approximately 5 years of my coffee shop salary. That same week, I had been thrilled to find a pair of jeans I wanted on the clearance rack. "What are you driving these days, Anastasia?" he asked, knowing full well I didn't have a car. "I'm saving up," I replied, trying to maintain my dignity, planning to buy something reliable next year after I get my license. He laughed, not unkindly, but with genuine confusion. "Why not just ask your parents? A sweet 16 without a car is kind of sad, don't you think?" That was Jackson's worldview in a nutshell. The concept of not being able to afford something, or choosing to save rather than spend, was utterly foreign to him. In his mind, the only reason someone wouldn't have something was because they hadn't asked for it yet. During junior year, my aging Honda Civic, which I had purchased for $1,500, broke down on the highway. The repair was going to cost $800, money I didn't have readily available since I had been putting everything toward my college fund. In a moment of desperation, I swallowed my pride and called Jackson to ask if I could borrow some money, promising to pay him back with interest from my next few paychecks. "Sorry, cuz, that's a lot of cash," he said, sounding genuinely regretful, but making no real effort to help. "Have you asked your parents? Or maybe you could get a credit card or something." That evening, my Instagram feed showed Jackson at an expensive restaurant with friends. The caption read, "Impromptu dinner. Why not?" The bill, visible in the corner of the photo, would have covered my car repairs twice over. I ended up picking up extra shifts and borrowing $200 from my best friend, Sarah, to get my car back on the road. The experience taught me 2 valuable lessons: never count on financial help from my cousin, and always keep an emergency fund separate from my other savings. Our high school graduation ceremonies fell on different weekends, so our families attended both. My graduation was a simple affair at the football stadium, followed by a backyard barbecue with close friends and family. I received a modest but meaningful gift from my parents, a laptop for college, and a check for $500 to help with expenses. Jackson's graduation was an entirely different experience. His school held the ceremony in an ornate performing arts center with professionally printed programs and speeches from local dignitaries. Afterward, Uncle Josh and Aunt Melanie hosted a lavish party at their country club with at least 100 guests, a live band, and catering that must have cost thousands. The graduation gift that awaited Jackson in the parking lot was a brand new Range Rover with a massive red bow on top. As the crowd of well-dressed guests oohed and awed, I stood back and observed my cousin's reaction. He seemed pleased, but not particularly surprised or grateful. It was simply what he had come to expect. "You heading to state in the fall, right?" Jackson asked me later that evening, referring to the public university I would be attending. "Yes, I got a partial scholarship." I innately couldn't keep a note of pride in my voice. The academic scholarship had been the result of countless late nights studying and maintaining a 4.0 GPA. Cool, he nodded absently. "I'm going to Princeton. Legacy admission. You know how it is. Dad made some calls." I didn't know how it was. My admission to college had been earned through grades, test scores, and carefully crafted application essays, not family connections. But I just smiled politely and congratulated him. As summer faded and fall approached, our paths diverged even further. I worked full-time to save every possible dollar before starting classes. Meanwhile, Jackson's Instagram showed a summer tour of Europe, expensive music festivals, and shopping sprees in preparation for his Ivy League experience. The contrast in our journeys couldn't have been more stark. Jackson was entering adulthood with every advantage money could buy, while I was preparing to work twice as hard for half the result. At least, that's what I believed at the time. I had no way of knowing how differently our stories would unfold. College was both harder and more rewarding than I had anticipated. My partial scholarship covered about 60% of my tuition, leaving me responsible for the remainder, plus housing, books, and living expenses. To make ends meet, I worked as a research assistant in the computer science department during the day and picked up weekend shifts at a local restaurant. The schedule was brutal, often leaving me with just 5 or 6 hours of sleep. But I was determined to graduate without crushing debt. I majored in software engineering, one of the few women in a program dominated by men. The first semester was particularly challenging, with several professors who seemed skeptical of my abilities, and male classmates who either ignored me or tried to explain basic concepts I already understood. There were nights I cried from exhaustion and frustration, questioning if I had chosen the right path. Meanwhile, Jackson's social media documented a very different college experience. His Princeton photos showcased elaborate fraternity parties, weekend trips to New York City, and spring breaks in tropical locations. Every few months, he would change his major, bouncing from economics to political science to art history, apparently without any concern for creating a coherent educational path. "Mom and Dad don't care what I study, as long as I get the Princeton degree," he explained during a rare phone conversation in our sophomore year. "The connections are what matter anyway, not the classes." During my junior year, I had a breakthrough moment that would ultimately change my trajectory of life, though I didn't recognize its significance at the time. I was taking an advanced algorithms class with Professor Amanda Martinez, one of the few female faculty members in the department. After turning in a particularly creative solution to a complex problem, she asked me to stay after class. "You have a unique way of thinking about system architecture," she said, reviewing my work. "Have you considered where you want to intern next summer?" I admitted that I had been too focused on paying for school to think much about internships, especially since many of the prestigious ones were unpaid, a luxury I couldn't afford. Professor Martinez shook her head. "Let me introduce you to some former students of mine. They started a small tech company 2 years ago, and they're looking for talented interns. It's paid, and if you impress them, it could lead to something more." The following week, I interviewed with Visutech, a startup focused on creating visualization software for complex datasets. The founding team, 3 recent graduates and a veteran software developer, worked out of a converted warehouse space that had more energy than amenities. I was offered an internship on the spot, with a salary that allowed me to reduce my restaurant hours. From day one, I threw myself into the work. While other interns maintained strict 9-to-5 schedules, I often stayed until midnight, fascinated by the problems we were solving. The founding team noticed my dedication and gradually began inviting me to strategy meetings and asking for my input on product decisions. By the end of the summer, the CEO, Michael, called me into his cluttered office for what I assumed would be a standard end of internship review. "We want you to stay on part-time during the school year, 20 hours a week, flexible around your classes, and we want to offer you something else." He slid a document across the desk. It was an offer of a small equity stake in the company, fractions of a percentage point, but real ownership nonetheless. "You think like an owner, not an employee," he explained. "We want to make that official. This could be worth nothing, or it could be worth something someday if we succeed. No pressure either way." I signed the paperwork that day, but told no one in my family about the equity. It seemed too abstract, too much like counting chickens before they hatched. Instead, I simply mentioned that I had a good part-time job in my field, which everyone took as another example of my work ethic. During holiday breaks, I would occasionally see Jackson, now sporting designer clothes with European labels and talking incessantly about his network of important connections. He had settled on economics as his major, though he complained constantly about the workload and admitted to paying other students to complete some of his assignments. "College is just a formality," he insisted during one particularly irritating conversation. "Dad already has a position waiting for me at the company after graduation, executive track from day one." I nodded and changed the subject, keeping my thoughts to myself. While Jackson coasted through college on his father's reputation and wallet, I was building something from scratch, developing skills and relationships based on my own merit. The contrast between our approaches couldn't have been more stark. Jackson was entering adulthood with every advantage money could buy, while I was preparing to work twice as hard for half the result. At least that's what I believed at the time. I had no way of knowing how differently our stories would unfold. College was both harder and more rewarding than I had anticipated. My partial scholarship covered about 60% of my tuition, leaving me responsible for the remainder, plus housing, books, and living expenses. To make ends meet, I worked as a research assistant in the computer science department during the day and picked up weekend shifts at a local restaurant. The schedule was brutal, often leaving me with just 5 or 6 hours of sleep, but I was determined to graduate without crushing debt. I majored in software engineering, one of the few women in a program dominated by men. The first semester was particularly challenging, with several professors who seemed skeptical of my abilities and male classmates who either ignored me or tried to explain basic concepts I already understood. There were nights I cried from exhaustion and frustration, questioning if I had chosen the right path. Meanwhile, Jackson's social media documented a very different college experience. His Princeton photos showcased elaborate fraternity parties, weekend trips to New York City, and spring break. The company had grown from 8 employees when I started to nearly 30, with a client list that included several Fortune 500 companies. We were still operating on venture funding rather than profit, but the trajectory was promising. I accepted the position immediately, excited to help build something meaningful rather than simply collecting a paycheck. Little did I know that decision would lead to a financial windfall beyond anything I could have imagined and create a seismic shift in my relationship with my entitled cousin. 3 years after graduation, on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael, our CEO. "All hands emergency meeting, 10 minutes, main conference room." My stomach dropped. In startup culture, emergency meetings usually meant one of two things. Either the company was shutting down or something monumental had happened. Given our recent struggles to secure additional funding, my mind immediately feared the worst. I hurried to the conference room where tension and confusion filled the air as 30 employees gathered, whispering speculations. Michael entered, followed by our executive team, all wearing expressions I couldn't quite read. "I'll cut straight to the point," Michael said, his voice wavering slightly. 30 minutes ago, we signed the final papers. DataCorp has acquired Vigitech for $200 million. The room erupted. People were hugging, crying, high-fiving, calling their families. My mind went blank as I tried to process what this meant. Later that afternoon, after hours of champagne celebrations and initial briefings about the transition, I received an email with the equity calculation. As an early employee with accumulated options, my stake amounted to slightly over 5% of the company. The acquisition translated to $10.2 million for me before taxes. I stared at the number on my screen, unable to comprehend that it referred to money that would soon be mine. Just 5 years earlier, I had been working double shifts to afford textbooks. Now, at 27 years old, I was a millionaire many times over. In the days that followed, I met with financial advisors who helped me understand how to manage my newfound wealth. I paid off my student loans, purchased a modest but comfortable condo in a neighborhood I had previously only dreamed of affording, and set aside funds to help my parents with their eventual retirement. Beyond these practical steps, I made few immediate changes to my lifestyle. What I didn't do was tell anyone about my windfall, with the exception of my parents. After careful consideration, we agreed to keep the exact amount private, even from extended family. I continued working at the newly acquired company, accepting a leadership role in the integration team with a comfortable but not ostentatious salary that wouldn't raise eyebrows. There's no reason everyone needs to know your financial situation, my father advised. Money changes how people see you, sometimes in ways you wouldn't expect. His words proved prescient, though not in the way either of us anticipated. Around the same time, Jackson had graduated from Princeton with mediocre grades but an impressive list of social connections. Despite the advantages of his education and family name, he struggled to find meaningful employment. After several half-hearted attempts at entry-level positions that he quit within months, declaring them beneath his potential, he eventually landed at his father's company in an ambiguous role with the title Strategic Development Associate. From what I gathered through family gossip, the position involved little actual responsibility, but came with a generous salary, a company car, and an expense account that Jackson utilized extensively. Uncle Josh apparently hoped his son would gradually grow into a legitimate role within the business, but evidence of such growth remained elusive. During a rare phone conversation with Aunt Melanie, she expressed frustration, bordering on embarrassment regarding Jackson's professional trajectory. We've given him every advantage, the best schools, connections, opportunities. I don't understand why he's struggling to find his path when other young people seem to manage just fine. There was a pointed quality to her comment that suggested a comparison to me, though she didn't mention me by name. It took considerable restraint not to point out that perhaps those advantages had actually disadvantaged Jackson in developing the resilience and work ethic necessary for genuine achievement. Instead, I murmured sympathetic noises and changed the subject. Over the years, I had learned that discussing the differences in our upbringings or values only led to tension. Aunt Melanie and Uncle Josh remained firmly convinced that their parenting approach had been superior, despite mounting evidence to the contrary. As the years passed, my investment portfolio grew under careful management, while my career advanced through genuine accomplishment, rather than nepotism. I found the work engaging and the compensation more than adequate, with the added satisfaction of knowing my bank account held a cushion most people could scarcely imagine. The most significant change in my life wasn't material, but psychological. The financial security allowed me to make decisions based on what truly mattered to me, rather than economic necessity. I could take professional risks, volunteer for causes I believed in, and help friends in need without worrying about my own stability. Meanwhile, Jackson's Instagram feed painted the picture of a man desperate to project success while contributing little of substance. Photos of business lunches, networking events, and captions about hustling and the entrepreneurial mindset seemed designed to convince others, and perhaps himself, that he was building something meaningful. The clash between our divergent paths felt inevitable, though I never expected it to unfold as dramatically as it did. The spark came at a family Thanksgiving dinner that would permanently alter our family dynamic and force a long overdue reckoning with the consequences of privilege without purpose. The invitation arrived on a crisp October morning via text as I walked to my office. Annual Thanksgiving at our place this year. Would love to have everyone together again. Let us know if you can make it. The sender was Uncle Josh, though I suspected Aunt Melanie had dictated it. I stared at the message, a knot forming in my stomach. It had been nearly 3 years since I attended Thanksgiving at their house. Each year, I'd invented excuses about work or travel, choosing instead to spend the holiday with my parents or friends who felt more like family. The thought of enduring Jackson's endless boasting about his fabricated accomplishments, while Aunt Melanie made subtle digs at my modest lifestyle, was enough to make me want to decline again. But something stopped me. Maybe it was time to quit avoiding them. I had nothing to prove, and perhaps I had grown enough that their performative wealth no longer held power over me. After a pause, I replied simply, "I'll be there. Thanks for the invitation." That evening, I called my parents to confirm they were also invited. My mother sounded hesitant. "Are you sure you want to go, sweetheart? The last time was uncomfortable." She was referring to Christmas 2 years earlier, when Jackson had spent the evening bragging about his executive role at his father's company and making pointed remarks about unambitious people glancing my way. I had bitten my tongue, but my father had nearly snapped before my mother intervened to change the subject. "I think I'm in a different place now," I assured her. "Their opinions don't affect me anymore. Besides, it'll be nice for us all to be together." What I didn't say was that a small, petty part of me wanted to watch Jackson inflate himself with importance, knowing privately that I had more financial security than he likely ever would. I had no intention of revealing my situation, but the knowledge gave me a quiet immunity to his posturing. As Thanksgiving drew near, I found myself oddly fixated on what to bring for the hosts. In previous years, I had shown up with modestly priced wine or homemade desserts, always met with faint condescension. This year, I could easily afford something extravagant, but that felt like stooping to their values. After some thought, I chose a balance. A limited edition bottle of bourbon Uncle Josh had once admired, paired with a handwritten note expressing genuine gratitude. Neither ostentatious nor inadequate, it felt like a reflection of my new relationship with money. The week before Thanksgiving, I had dinner with David, my former college boyfriend turned trusted friend and financial advisor. He was one of the few people who knew about my windfall. "So," he said, raising an eyebrow, "you're voluntarily spending Thanksgiving with the people who've condescended to you your entire life? That's either very enlightened or completely masochistic." I laughed. "Maybe a bit of both. But I'm done avoiding them. Their words don't carry weight anymore, and my parents shouldn't have to deal with that dynamic without me." David smirked. "Just promise me one thing. If Jackson starts his self-made success speech while bragging about living off his parents, at least consider dropping the tiniest hint about your net worth. The look on his face alone would be worth it." "That's exactly what I'm not going to do," I insisted, though I couldn't help smiling at the thought. The point is, I don't need their validation anymore. "Very mature," David conceded, "but the offer stands. Give me a signal and I'll crash dessert as your fake financial advisor with urgent news about your 8-figure portfolio." On Thanksgiving morning, I woke early and chose my outfit carefully. Simple, elegant, quietly confident, free of obvious designer labels. I knew it was ironic to care about my appearance for people whose approval I claim not to seek, but I justified it as armor rather than appeasement. The 45-minute drive to Uncle Josh and Aunt Melanie's house tightened the knot in my stomach with every passing mile. Their home was just as I remembered, imposing, meticulously maintained, decked with professional holiday decorations. The circular driveway was filled with luxury vehicles, including what I assumed was Jackson's latest toy, a gleaming black Tesla. Taking a steadying breath, I gathered the bourbon, a bouquet of flowers, and my composure before walking to the front door. Before I could ring the bell, it swung open to reveal Aunt Melanie, flawless as ever. "Anastasia, darling, you made it," she exclaimed, air-kissing both cheeks with manufactured enthusiasm. "It's been far too long. Come in, come in. Everyone's in the great room." Inside, my parents immediately spotted me, my father raising his glass in greeting as my mother hurried over to hug me. And then I saw him, Jackson, stationed near the fireplace, holding court with our younger cousins. He had put on weight, his expensive suit strained at the buttons, his hair thinning despite his age of just 34. When his eyes met mine, I caught a flicker of insecurity before it was masked by his usual bravado. Well, well, the prodigal cousin returns. I was starting to think you were avoiding us, Anastasia. I smiled pleasantly, determined not to let him dictate the tone. Hello, Jackson. Good to see you too. Happy Thanksgiving. I didn't know then that these polite words would be among the last civil ones exchanged between us that evening, or that within hours, the carefully crafted facade of harmony would shatter beyond repair. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, a space so rarely used it felt more like a stage set than a home. The table was immaculately arranged with Aunt Melanie's heirloom china, silver, sterling flatware, and crystal glasses that shimmered beneath the ostentatious chandelier. Place cards, written in elegant calligraphy, assigned each guest to a seat, an unnecessary level of formality for a family gathering. I found myself seated between my mother and Uncle Josh's sister, Margaret, with Jackson directly opposite me, a placement that felt deliberately orchestrated to invite comparison. My parents exchanged a knowing glance as we sat down, my father giving me a subtle wink of encouragement. The initial conversation was harmless enough, as dishes were passed and wine poured. We spoke of the mild weather, recent films, and light family gossip about cousins who hadn't attended. For a moment, I thought perhaps I had overestimated the evening's potential for discomfort, that we might actually enjoy a peaceful holiday meal together. That illusion shattered when Uncle Josh raised his glass for an impromptu toast. Before we officially begin, I'd like to recognize some exciting developments. As many of you know, Jackson has recently been promoted to Director of Strategic Initiatives at J&M Manufacturing. A polite murmur of congratulations passed around the table. I maintained my smile, though I knew from industry contacts that such a title was typically invented for connections rather than earned. And furthermore, Uncle Josh continued, he's spearheading our expansion into the Asian market with a new product line he personally conceptualized. Jackson beamed, nodding graciously at the praise from relatives who lacked the knowledge to question the claim. My father caught my eye briefly, his expression neutral, but his thoughts transparent. We both knew J&M had been struggling to break into the Asian market for years, and that any true initiative likely came from the executive team, not Jackson. How about you, Anastasia? Aunt Melanie turned to me with exaggerated interest. How's your little tech company? Still enjoying the 9-to-5 life? Before I could reply, Jackson jumped in. Don't be modest, Aunt Melanie. I'm sure Anastasia's role is very important. What was it again? Senior developer? Project coordinator? I'm the integration team lead, I answered evenly. After our acquisition, I've been managing how our technology is implemented within the parent company's systems. Acquisition? Uncle Josh's interest peaked, business curiosity briefly overtaking family politics. Who bought your startup? Data Corp acquired us last year, I said, deliberately minimizing the significance. It's been a positive transition overall. Jackson's expression flickered with recognition. He clearly knew Data Corp's reputation before he smoothed it over. Well, that must be nice, having a stable corporate parent. Much less stressful than real entrepreneurship, I imagine. I resisted the urge to point out that Jackson had never entrepreneured anything in his life, instead taking a bite of turkey and complimenting Aunt Melanie on the meal. The conversation shifted to other topics, as course after elaborate course arrived, each more excessive than necessary. Jackson, however, kept steering the discussion back to his supposed business prowess. Vague tales of meetings with Asian investors and revolutionary product ideas that anyone with real experience would recognize as hollow. My parents maintained polite interest, though I occasionally caught my father's stifling sighs of exasperation. The pivotal moment came during dessert. My phone buzzed with an email I intended to ignore until I saw the subject, "Urgent investment opportunity closing tonight," from David. Knowing his awareness of my Thanksgiving plans, I assumed it was genuinely time-sensitive rather than his promised joke about my finances. "Excuse me," I said, rising from the table. "I need to take care of a quick work matter. Everything looks delicious. I'll be right back." I stepped into the adjacent study and quickly scanned David's email about a limited investment in a promising green tech startup. The terms were favorable and aligned with my interest in sustainability. I replied, confirming an allocation of $2 million from my portfolio, adding a brief note asking about his own Thanksgiving. As I pressed send, I sensed someone behind me. Turning, I found Jackson standing uncomfortably close, holding 2 sniffers of brandy. Thought you might want something to sip while you handle your critical emergency. Can't let the corporate overlords celebrate without you, right? Thanks, I said, accepting the brandy and sliding my phone into my pocket. It wasn't work, actually, just a time-sensitive investment matter. Investment? His eyebrows lifted. Like a 401k adjustment or something? His condescension triggered a rare spark of competitiveness in me. No, I said evenly. A private equity opportunity in the sustainable tech sector. Jackson laughed as though I had made a joke. Private equity? Those usually require minimum buy-ins of at least $100,000. What are you doing? Pooling resources with friends? Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again with David's reply. Jackson's eyes darted to the glowing screen in my pocket, where the preview text was clearly visible. Confirmed for $2 million. We'll execute tonight. Happy Thanksgiving, fellow millionaire. For a moment, everything froze. Jackson's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then something darker. Jealousy twisted with rage. $2 million? He sputtered, his voice rising. What kind of game are you playing, Anastasia? I'm not playing any game, I said calmly, realizing our voices could already be heard from the dining room. Let's go back. But Jackson wasn't finished. He blocked my path, his face flushed red beneath his carefully groomed stubble. No, you don't get to drop something like that and walk away. Are you saying you have $2 million just lying around to throw at a random startup? That's more than most people's net worth. Jackson, lower your voice, I urged, hearing the dining room chatter falter. This isn't the time or place. Oh, I think it's exactly the time and place, he snapped, following me back toward the table. All these years looking down on my family, judging our lifestyle, acting superior with your so-called work ethic. And meanwhile what? Secretly rich? Is this some kind of trust fund? We re-entered the dining room to find every eye on us, dessert forks frozen midair. Is everything all right? Aunt Melanie asked, her hostess smiles strained. Ask Anastasia, Jackson shot back before I could answer. Apparently, my cousin, the humble employee, is tossing around millions in investments. When were you planning to share that with the family? A stunned silence fell. My parents exchanged anxious glances, unprepared for this revelation. Jackson, that's enough, my father said firmly. Anastasia's finances are her private business. Private business? Jackson barked. That's rich, pun intended, coming from you, Uncle David. All these years acting like we're the materialistic ones for supporting our son when your daughter's been sitting on a secret fortune? What kind of hypocritical game is this? It's not a game, I said, my voice steady, despite the chaos. The startup I worked for was acquired last year. My equity translated into roughly $10 million. I chose not to broadcast it because it doesn't define who I am. The number landed like a physical blow. Jackson actually staggered, his face contorting in disbelief and outrage. Aunt Melanie gasped audibly, her hand flying to her pearl necklace as if grasping for support. It's not fair, she sobbed, turning to my father with a face twisted in anguish. You always made us feel guilty for giving Jackson advantages, for wanting him to have the best. And all this time, your daughter was hiding a fortune. It's not fair. My father, who was normally the most even-tempered man I knew, rose slowly from his chair, his voice dangerously calm. Melanie, what's unfair is your fundamental misunderstanding of what we taught our daughter. Anastasia earned every penny of that money through hard work, intelligence, and character, the values we prioritized over possessions. The fact that you and Jackson immediately assumed deception instead of achievement says more about your values than hers.
The room fell silent, save for Melanie's sobbing and Jackson's ragged breathing as he glared at me with unmasked hostility. I have worked for everything I have, I said quietly, addressing not only Jackson but the entire table. Every opportunity, every achievement, every dollar. No one handed me anything. For years, I've listened to you belittle my choices, imply that I lacked ambition because I didn't flaunt wealth or status. I never corrected you because I don't measure myself by those standards, and I'm not going to start now. I stood, gathering my purse and coat, suddenly exhausted by the entire charade. "Thank you for dinner," I said. "I think it's best if I leave." On my way out, I set the bottle of bourbon I had brought on the side table, still wrapped with its handwritten card. It felt symbolic now, once a gesture of gratitude, now an offering rendered meaningless by the irreparable chasm of understanding that had finally revealed itself. Behind me, Jackson's voice cracked as he continued ranting. "She thinks she's better than all of us, little Miss Perfect, hiding millions while we're just shallow materialists in her eyes." The last thing I heard before closing the front door was Melanie's shrill accusation aimed at my parents. "This is your fault. You raised her to judge us." The cold November air hit my face like a cleansing slap, clearing the emotional fog of the dining room as I walked to my car. My hands trembled slightly as I fumbled with the keys. What had just happened felt momentous. A collision of worldviews decades in the making, finally erupting with the force to destroy far more than a holiday meal. The drive home blurred past, streetlights streaking through tears I hadn't realized were falling. By the time I pulled into my condo's garage, a hollow emptiness replaced the anger and defensiveness from earlier. It wasn't the revelation of my finances that devastated me. That truth was bound to emerge eventually. What broke me was realizing my family could so quickly reduce me to a number, assume deception rather than recognize achievement, and twist years of dedication into a narrative where I was the villain. Inside, I kicked up my heels and collapsed on the couch, without bothering to turn on the lights. Darkness matched my mood as I replayed the evening in fragments, second-guessing everything. Should I have disclosed the windfall sooner? Would that have prevented tonight's explosion or just delayed it? My phone buzzed with texts from my parents, checking if I was safe and apologizing for everything. I sent brief reassurances, but lacked the energy for more. Tomorrow would be soon enough. Just as I silenced the phone, it rang again. An unexpected caller, Uncle Josh. I hesitated, then answered. "Anastasia, I'm not sure what to say except I'm sorry for how tonight unfolded." The apology stunned me. Uncle Josh had always seemed more invested in appearances than relationships. Vulnerability was unfamiliar from him. "It was an unfortunate situation all around," I replied neutrally, unwilling to take blame but not wishing to escalate further. "Melanie is..." He paused, searching. "She's always been sensitive about comparisons between our families, about parenting. Learning about your success triggered something in her." "And Jackson?" I asked quietly. A heavy sigh carried over the line. "Jackson is Jackson. He's never handled perceived slights well, but that's on us too. We never taught him how to process disappointment or to measure himself by his own standards instead of others." The admission was so unexpected I was momentarily speechless. In all my life, I'd never heard him acknowledge any flaw in how they'd raised their son. "I appreciate the call," I finally said, "but I think everyone needs some space right now. Maybe after the holidays we can try again, with clearer understanding." Perhaps he agreed, though neither of us sounded convinced. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of what you've accomplished, Anastasia. Truly." After hanging up, I sat in the darkness for a long while, turning over his words, searching for the sincerity I wanted to believe was there. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house for a debrief that was equal parts emotional processing and strategic planning for future family interactions. My mother brewed strong coffee while my father paced the kitchen, still agitated by his sister-in-law's accusations. "The nerve," he muttered for perhaps the 10th time. As if teaching you the value of hard work and character was some sort of crime against Jackson. "David," my mother interjected gently, We've already established that Melanie's perspective is distorted. Repeating it doesn't help anyone, not the least of all Anastasia. I sipped my coffee, finding comfort in their unwavering support. What happens now? Are we just supposed to pretend nothing happened the next time we see them? My father snorted dismissively, but my mother considered the question seriously. I think time will determine that. Families have weathered worse storms. But regardless of what they choose to do, you have nothing to apologize for. Your success is earned, and the way you've chosen to handle that success reflects the values we're proud to have instilled. She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. The real question is what you want moving forward. Do you want a relationship with that part of the family? And if so, on what terms? It was a question I couldn't immediately answer, but one that guided my reflections in the months that followed. 3 months after the Thanksgiving disaster, I received a surprising text from Aunt Melanie. Jackson started new job today. Not at family business. Entry level at marketing firm downtown. His choice. Thought you might like to know. The message, free from her usual emotional manipulation or passive aggression, seemed like an olive branch of sorts. I responded with simple encouragement. That's a big step. Wishing him well. Through the family grapevine, I later learned more details. After the Thanksgiving revelation, Jackson had apparently gone through something of an identity crisis, culminating in his decision to try building a career without his father's connections or financial backing. It was the first job he had ever secured entirely on his own merits. Despite the entry-level role being a far cry from his fabricated executive position, word was he was actually applying himself with unexpected diligence. Meanwhile, I had been doing some soul-searching of my own. The financial security that had once felt like a private victory now carried responsibility.
After consulting with financial advisors and giving it considerable thought, I established a scholarship fund for first-generation college students studying technology fields, specifically those working while pursuing their education. The initial endowment was $2 million, enough to support 10 students annually with tuition and stipends. I named it after my parents, honoring the values they had instilled in me rather than seeking personal recognition. When the local paper ran a small piece about the new scholarship, I sent the clipping to my extended family without comment. It wasn't about proving anything, but about demonstrating, through action rather than words, what wealth meant to me. An opportunity to create opportunity. A full year passed before I saw Jackson again. It was at a cousin's wedding, a neutral territory where family politics were suspended in the spirit of celebration. He approached me during the reception, noticeably thinner than at Thanksgiving, his designer suit replaced with something more modest, but better fitting. "Hey," he said awkwardly, extending his hand. "It's been a while." I shook it, searching his face for any trace of the hostility that had defined our last encounter. Instead, I found something unexpected. Humility. "I hear you've been making changes," I offered, giving him an opening. He nodded, glancing at his seltzer water instead of the champagne others carried. "Turns out starting over is harder than starting from scratch. Who knew?" "Everyone who's ever had to do it," I replied, but without malice. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Fair enough. Listen, I'm not good at this kind of thing, but I owe you an apology. What I said at Thanksgiving, how I behaved, it wasn't about you. It was never really about you." "I know," I said simply. "The scholarship thing. That was really something. Mom showed me the article. It made me think about what I'd do if I suddenly had that kind of money. And I realized I had no idea, beyond buying stuff I didn't need. That was a wake-up call." We talked for nearly an hour, not about money or success or the past, but about the challenges of figuring out who you are when all the external markers you've relied on are stripped away. For perhaps the first time in our lives, we spoke as equals, each acknowledging our own struggles and growth without comparison or judgment. As the years passed, my relationship with wealth evolved. I learned that money itself is neutral, neither inherently corrupting nor ennobling. What matters is the relationship we choose to have with it, the values that guide our decisions about earning, spending, saving, and sharing. The jealousy I once felt watching Jackson handed everything now seems wasted energy. In truth, I was given something far more valuable, the chance to discover my own strength, to build confidence through achievement rather than acquisition, to find satisfaction in effort rather than entitlement. And Jackson, he's still figuring things out, still untangling the complicated legacy of privilege without purpose. We're not close, but there's a mutual respect between us now that was once impossible. Sometimes the greatest gifts require the most painful unwrapping. The $10 million changed my life, but not in the way most might assume. The true freedom it provided wasn't freedom from work or worry, but freedom from external validation, from the need to prove my worth through possessions, titles, or the approval of others who measure success differently. True wealth, I've discovered, isn't about what you have. It's about what you value. It's about building a life aligned with your deepest principles rather than others' expectations. It's about recognizing that being handed everything often leaves you with nothing within yourself, while earning your way makes you someone who can never be diminished by circumstances or others' opinions. If you've ever felt like the underdog in your family or watched others handed opportunities you had to fight for, remember this: the struggles that feel unfair are often the very experiences that develop your most valuable qualities. The things we work hardest for become the foundations we can never lose. What are your thoughts on entitlement versus earning your way? Have you experienced similar family dynamics? Drop a comment below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need this perspective today. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, your worth is never determined by your net worth, but by the character you build along the way.